Instead of telling people about your story, why not just tell them your story? Hello, and welcome back to the show. I hope you've had a happy week. Every so often, I'll find myself reading the first draft of a story or an essay, and I'll feel like even if they don't mean it, the writer is doing everything they can to keep me out of the story they're telling. Like, they want me to know what happened, but they don't want me to know too much about it. And really, it's an odd sensation to think that a writer went to all the trouble to write their story, only for me, as a reader, to feel like I'm looking at it from the other side of a fence. And it's common enough that I thought we'd take some time today to talk about what's going on when writers are leaving their readers out in the cold, and what they can do instead to invite their readers into their work. Not only is this something that I've observed in the work of developing writers, but it's also something I wanted to talk about in response to a question from one of you. So, a very special thanks for asking this question that brings us together today, and some apologies for leaving you in suspense for so long. Now let's imagine you're meeting a friend for lunch and you want to tell them about that time that a stranger gave you a bag of starfruit. The story might go something like this. So anyway, there I was, standing on this guy's patio, and he's saying all kinds of things about his dad, something about bats, and then he gets it in his head that I've never had starfruit before, so he goes inside and comes back with a grocery bag full of them. He tells me they're from the tree in his backyard and says I should make juice when I get home. In this example, you're telling your lunch friend about something that happened to you, and you're just narrating a sequence of events in order. In a situation like this, that's a really natural and reasonable way to tell the story. At a lunch meeting, you're really just bonding with a friend by sharing a strange experience that you had. So you tell the story, but you don't spend too much time to do it. Because A, who's got the time to listen to a lengthy version of the story, and B, it wouldn't be very polite to monopolize all of the time at lunch. So you keep things moving and just hit the highlights without going into too much detail. Really, this story is delivered in a form that I often hear nonfiction writers call summary. It's a style of narration that just presents the sequence of events in order without presenting a lot of details. As we'll see later, there is some value in telling a story this way, but it can also be really limited and limiting. In this version of the story, we're really getting everything secondhand. We're hearing about the events after the fact, and though we may have a generalized sense of where this took place, we also really only have a shallow grasp of what actually went on. There was a guy, he said some things, and then he sent the speaker home with a bag full of starfruit. With summary, we don't get to be in the moment with the speaker or narrator. Rather than experiencing the story, we hear about it after the fact. And for friends at lunch, this is a reasonable way to tell the story, but for readers of literature, this can leave them feeling like they're only observing the story from a distance. They're getting a report of the events, not participating in them, and for a lot of readers, it's that participation that makes reading fun in the first place. Every time I've heard nonfiction writers talk about summary, they've also talked about scene, a form of writing that doesn't just report events, but invites readers to participate in them. We've talked before about the importance of experience, whether that's the idea of poetic meaning being a heaping up of emotional factors and experiences, as proposed by friend of the show Kenneth Burke, or the urgent plea in David Abrams' Spell of the Sensuous that we pay more attention to our senses and through our senses. And much to the chagrin of some awfully tiresome pedants, I've even made the audacious claim that poetry develops its meaningfulness through the accumulation of experience, and that we'll understand poems better when we read for experience rather than for some abstract proposition about what a poem really means. Anyway, when we talk about writing in scene, we're talking about writing in such a way that readers get to experience the moment we're writing about rather than just hearing about it. Maybe something like this. That afternoon, I stood on the shaded patio of a man who had just introduced himself as Mark. You know, he said, my father would have loved it here. He swept his arm in an arc, surveying the area that was sheltered by trees and a wall that was painted a cheery golden yellow. From where we stood, I could see into the cool shadowed depths of his house. It was, truly, a refuge from the heat that seared the streets outside. But, he continued, he died not too long ago. Oh, I'm really sorry, I started to say. No, don't feel bad. He lived a proud life and died without regrets. It was a well-died death. We would all be lucky to go like him. Mark gazed up into the canopy of leaves, seeming to sway along with them as a breeze passed by us. Actually, the bats love these trees too, he started up again. They're not here now, but they're all over at night. You can hear them squeaking away. It's the bugs they like, you know. Oh, I said. But it's actually the trees in the back that I like the most. Starfruit. Have you had starfruit before? Yeah, I said, thinking about the time that the produce clerk from the local grocery store visited my class in 3rd grade with samples of starfruit, papayas, and tiny bananas in tow. Well, good. I'll make sure you go home with some. Actually, I'll go get them right now. Mark disappeared into the house, and I took my turn staring into the branches, thinking about what it meant to die a well-died death, about bats, and about the waxy, astringent bite of that glistening slice of star on a napkin all those years ago. Well, here you go. Mark reappeared and thrust a plastic bag stuffed with starfruit towards me. They're okay to eat, but you're really better off making juice with them. It's the best juice you'll have, especially since these are the best starfruit you'll have. Oh, but you'll probably want to wash them first. You know, the bats. Then, somehow, I ended up outside of the yellow walls, standing in the empty street with several pounds of starfruit in hand. Looking down the road, I could scarcely remember what had brought me to Mark's house in the first place. See how different your reading experience is? In the second version, we're not just hearing somebody's report on a sequence of events. Instead, we're seeing everything through their eyes and living through them as if in real time. We're not just hearing about these events, we're experiencing them. And this is a key way to invite your readers into your work. When you summarize, you keep them at a distance, only giving them a timeline and denying them the particular details. When you create a scene, though, you let the readers into the actual moment. You're not just reporting on what happened, you're pulling them in and letting them see what's there. They don't just hear about what the characters were talking about, they get to hear the actual words. They get to feel the breeze and think about the bats. It's also hard not to notice that the scene takes up more space on the page than the summary. And, of course, you are saying more things. You have to if you're going to build up a scene with sufficient detail. But the scene also gives the readers more time. Writing in this style slows them down. It points the readers to significant details and gives them space to contemplate all of it. Where summary is like dumping out a bucket of story all at once, scene is maybe more like serving up a story one sip at a time. Really, this scene versus summary distinction is a variation on the theme show, don't tell, or as one of my professor friends put it the other day, create, don't tell. I don't just want to hear that somebody is angry, she said. I want you to create a scene where the person walks into the room, kicks the trash can, and says something rude. And this is the other key difference between showing and telling, which we've talked about before. When you show, you're giving your readers evidence for the things you're saying about characters. They know that somebody is angry because they saw him kick the trash can, not just because you told them to take your word for it. So writing in scenes offers loads of benefits. By presenting your story through the senses and through reflection, you give your readers more stuff to capture and hold their attention. You allow your readers in close, letting them live out the experience of the story rather than just hearing about it. And ultimately, you make your story more convincing and realistic because, in a sense, your readers are experiencing it firsthand rather than just taking you at your word. Really, writing in scene is valuable for the same reason that it's usually more interesting to go see a movie than to hear somebody tell you about one. For the most part, watching the actual scenes of a movie will be more meaningful, more moving, and more memorable than just listening to somebody else's summary. Now, before we finish, it's probably a good idea to put an asterisk on the whole thing. Yes, writing in scenes will make your writing more engaging, more memorable, and more meaningful, but that doesn't mean that we should abandon summary altogether. Summary still has its value, and like all things, scene and summary tend to work in tension to make things that are better than either one could do on their own. I have a strong preference for scene, and I've observed that it's much more common for writers to rely too much on summary than on scene. Because of that, I will always recommend, as a general rule, that writers should put more attention into writing out their scenes than in practicing summary. But too much of a good thing has its downsides, and writing only in scene can create some issues. In comparing the differences between books and television, the scholar Wayne Booth observed that readers are often conditioned and expected to read meaning into the tiniest details, while viewers of television shows usually aren't. For example, if a character in a novel has a scar, that's backstory. But if a character in a TV show has a scar, that could just be because the actor has one. So, because of the way that readers will look for meaning in every little thing that you tell them, it can sometimes be useful to set those details aside and move them through portions of the story with summary. Not every moment of your writing has to be developed in a fully realized scene. Sometimes overdeveloped details can become distracting. That means that you can leave out details that aren't actively contributing to the purpose of the story that you're trying to tell. If it's not significant that somebody has loose threads on their jacket sleeve, then don't feel compelled to say it just because you think you need to develop scenes by describing every single detail. And don't feel like you need to make a scene out of everything that happens between the first and last sentence of your story. Some events can safely be mentioned just in passing. For example, if you're writing a story about somebody's trial, it's probably okay not to develop a big scene out of the way they get out of the car and walk into the courthouse if it's not really that important for the story you're telling. It's not possible for all the details in a story to be equally important, so you can use summary as a way to move your readers through the less important parts of your story more efficiently, and then reserve scenes to invite them into the most significant parts, letting them experience those moments for themselves. But that said, the risks of relying too much on summary seem to be much greater than the risks of relying too much on scene. If you write too many scenes, your readers may struggle to figure out what they should be paying attention to. If you rely too much on summary, your readers will probably feel disengaged or maybe even alienated. They won't feel like they're reading your story, they'll just feel like they're reading about your story. There are few things as unsatisfying as getting to the end of a piece and realizing that it never really offered you anything more meaningful than a casual chat over lunch. Instead of losing yourself in a meaningful experience, you only got to hear a summary report of something that might have been interesting if only you had been allowed to do more than just hear about it. Luckily, this common problem is easy enough to resolve if you'll just invite your readers into your piece by creating scenes that allow them to experience your story and all that it has to offer for themselves. Ultimately, good writing is about more than just interesting ideas or effective outlines. Those things are important, but unless the writing offers a compelling experience that is worth having, those other things are going to fall flat. Good writing, whatever it's about, will offer meaningful experiences, and those kinds of experiences are almost always built out of scenes. Once again, I want to thank you both for joining me and for your questions and requests like the one that brought us together today. If you have other questions about writing, please be sure to let me know. That is, after all, what this show is all about. Now, go craft some amazing scenes, and I'll see you real soon.